Hey gang, this is Greg, and I wanted to chat with you guys for the next few minutes on grains. What they are, what some of the terminology means, and maybe some things that you didn't know about. So we eat grains all the time, but we often don't realize what they are doing in our body and what they provide for us as one of the main macronutrients, which are carbohydrates. So first, let's talk about carbohydrates just really quickly. Obviously, it's one of the three macronutrients, along with proteins and fats. Carbohydrates are really what give us our quick energy. So why do they give us quick energy? Well, because they are composed primarily of starches and sugars, and they have fibers in them as well. But it's the starches and sugars that break down very easily and very quickly in our system and convert to the main sugar molecule that our body uses, which is glucose. It is our blood sugar. In fact, the digestion process starts right in the mouth as we chew. We obviously bring in saliva, and saliva has in it the enzyme called amylase, and that helps to digest even as before it gets to our stomach. So that's how fast it starts to catabolize or break down so that it can be used. Once it gets into the stomach, it's quickly converted into bile, goes into the small intestines and out really quickly. On the downside is that we get a lot of carbohydrates or a lot of sugar in, we're going to get what's called sugar spikes. So those are glucose spikes, and that's what we don't want to have. So that's why when we eat carbohydrates, we kind of want to take it a little bit easy on them because we don't want to bring too much sugar into the system. Obviously, if we continue to do that for too long, then we wind up potentially with some problems with the onset of hyperglycemia and possibly even diabetes. We just need to be aware of the intake of carbohydrates. So in a nutshell, what are grains? Well, grains actually are a part of grasses. Grains are actually the seeds that come from grasses. In fact, if you have ornamental grasses in your yard, you will see that in the early fall to mid-fall range or something like that, your grasses will have grown very tall and very ornamental. Then all of a sudden, boom, out of the top come these tassels, and there's the little seeds out of the top. And so that's not any different from any of the other types of grasses that we harvest and take the seeds out of. Wheats are the same way. Wheat is a grass. So rices are grass. Even corn's a grass. Yeah, it's a different kind of grass. We don't think of it as a grass, but it is. And so these types of grasses and the seeds that come from them are what we call cereal grains. I know when we think of cereal, we tend to think about the cereal that's in the boxes that we eat in the mornings. But really, it's a classification of a type of grain, and that's the grain that comes from the grasses. So what I'm going to do now is just quickly describe to you what a whole grain is. Well, of course, a whole grain is the grain itself before it is processed or refined by milling and grinding. The first thing you do is when the harvester collects the seed and separates it from the rest of the grass, you finally got the seed there. It is in basically 4 different components. The grain itself has a hull, a hard hull around it, a shell, and that really is not edible. So there is a first step in processing. And by the way, all grains are processed. So when you hear that processing is bad for you, well, it's not necessarily bad for you. It's just how much you process determines the concentration of the grain and therefore how much potential sugar you will intake. But the whole grain itself, as I say, contains that hull or the inedible part. And so the very first step, get rid of that. Then what's left are 3 other elements to the grain. Another outer membrane, that's called the bran. That bran has a lot of nutrients in it. It also protects and keeps the shape of the grain. Then inside is what's called the endosperm around that. That's where all the carbohydrates and sugars come from, because that is the food for eventually if you were to replant that grain, that seed. That is the food that seed needs in order for it to germinate. And so the last element is in fact the germ, or the embryo, so to speak. So in the milling process, when we got rid of the hull, we leave the whole grain, which includes, right, the bran, endosperm, and the germ. So what does that look like? Well, these are what they look like, right? So this is a whole grain here after the first milling process. These grains are pretty big, so they have some size to them. Here's rice, for instance, as you can see here. And these rice is in whole grains. And as you can see, you can also mill these even further then to the point where you create flours. And of course, the concentration is much more with flour. And see how thin the granules are. And just as you're aware that that's what happens, so you want to be somewhat careful in choosing that level of carbohydrate. I'm not telling you to get rid of carbohydrates by any means. I would never say that. I love carbs and will always be a part of my diet. But we want to ensure that we at least have an understanding of what happens when we consume these types of products. So then what's the difference between a whole grain and a completely refined or processed grain? And the quickest way to check to see that is with, in fact, rice, because we have brown rice like this, and then we have white rice. So what's the difference between these two? Is in a separate milling process to get this white rice, what's going to happen is of grinding out and taking out the bran and the germ in the grain, and that's only leaving the endosperm. And so the endosperm is a lighter color, usually an off-white color, and so that's what's left. And that's true with all grains as well. And we do flours, obviously, so that they can be very malleable and we can work with them, or we can, like in the case of Kodiak cakes here, my favorite pancakes, we can make it into a liquid state so that it pours and spreads out evenly and creates great pancakes. So if you keep the whole grain intact, the bran, the endosperm, and the germ, and then you mill it and grind it down into a flour, that's where you get the 100% whole grain flours. And that's what you want to look for on your ingredients labels. You want to have a more nutritious flour, simply because when you keep the bran and the germ in, you are keeping vital nutrients in the flour itself. When you take the bran and the germ out and it's just a refined, or what's called enriched wheat flour, because you've stripped out the bran and the germ, which have all the micronutrients and additional proteins, that they add it back in. And so that's why you will see a lot of times on the ingredients labels, you're going to see actually listed there of the various vitamin Bs that have been removed in that process and then re-added back in. And so enriched flours are flours that have the endosperm only and have had vitamins inserted back in. But as I say, they're less nutritious than our whole wheat variety of flour. So when you eat your grains, just be aware that they are carbohydrates, and so we want to be able to eat those certainly as a part of our meals, but to understand that yes, they do create a lot of quick energy, but that they also convert themselves into glucose very fast and can give us glucose spikes. I just wanted to give you kind of a Grains 101 to get you going and kind of give you maybe a different perspective on what grains really are. So anyway, have a fine day and we'll see you.